My name is Rachel Turner, and the moment I realized my own blood wanted me gone happened under the warm glow of 100 glittering lights. It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life, my graduate school commencement banquet at the Fairmont in San Francisco, hosted by my family. The hall was drenched in white roses, a jazz quartet played in the corner, and crystal chandeliers threw shimmering patterns across the marble floor. Every inch of the evening screamed celebration. But inside, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that always came when my family was near. I'd just accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter when I caught the unmistakable image in my peripheral vision, my father leaning over my glass at the service table, slipping something pale and granular from his closed fist. It dissolved slowly, almost lazily, into the golden liquid. He didn't look up, didn't notice me watching. He just adjusted his cufflinks and stepped away as if he'd been straightening the napkins. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. The chatter, the music, the laughter, it all dimmed to a dull hum in the back of my skull. My father, the man who'd drilled into me the importance of family above all since I was a child, was trying to poison me. My palms started to sweat against the smooth stem of the glass. My instincts screamed to drop it, to confront him, to make a scene right there. But years of surviving this family's subtle warfare had trained me to do something else entirely: breathe, act, normal, and think. I scanned the room. My mother stood near the governor's wife, laughing in that brittle way she reserved for high society functions. My older brother Adam, the golden boy of the Turners, was holding court near the bar with a cluster of Silicon Valley investors. No one else had seen what I saw. To everyone here, we were the perfect Turner family patriotic benefactors, business moguls, the picture of American success. But I knew better. I'd known for years that beneath the polished veneer lay something ugly, something that had always put profit control and image above human life, including mine. My mind raced. Why now? Why tonight? Then I remembered the trust fund my grandmother had left me. I'd just completed the last condition to access it, my graduate degree. By Monday, $10 million would be legally mine, independent of the Turner empire. And if I'd learned anything growing up in this house, it was that my parents didn't give up control without a fight. I shifted my grip on the champagne, willing my hand not to shake. My biochemistry background told me it wouldn't take much. Just the right compound, colorless and barely soluble, could be enough to make me collapse before the night was over. I forced my lips into a smile, nodding at acquaintances as I moved through the crowd, keeping the glass tilted so none of the liquid touched my mouth. Inside, my pulse was a pounding drumbeat. I could feel the story sharpening in my mind like a knife. They weren't just trying to control me anymore, they were willing to erase me. And here's where I'll lean in and say, if you're listening right now, you need to understand how fast the ground can shift beneath you when family turns into predator. I'll share exactly what happened next, but I want you to stay with me to the end, because this isn't just about survival. It's about reclaiming your freedom, even from the people who swore to protect you. That night in that ballroom, I made a silent vow I wasn't going to be their victim. Not tonight. Not ever. And as I scanned the sea of sequined dresses and tuxedos, I knew I'd need more than quick thinking. I'd need proof. Something undeniable that would turn the predator into the hunted. I didn't know it yet, but the next few hours would unravel everything the Turner name stood for, and everyone in that room would learn the truth about the family they thought they admired. I took a slow breath, still holding the glass of poisoned champagne, as if it were just another accessory in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard it almost felt like the music in the room was syncing with it. The plan was still forming in my head, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. And I knew exactly who I could trust. At the far end of the banquet hall, my best friend from college, Mia, was laughing with another friend of mine, Jordan. They didn't know my family well. They'd only ever seen the glossy Christmas cards and the expensive dinners. But they knew me. They'd been there through the quiet nights when I confessed how suffocating it felt to be a Turner, how my parents measured love in obedience and loyalty in silence. I made my way toward them, keeping my movements unhurried. When I reached Mia, I touched her elbow lightly and leaned in close, my voice low. I need you to do something for me. No questions right now. Just do it. Her eyes widened, but she nodded immediately. What's wrong? Jordan asked, scanning my face. Not here, I said, forcing a smile for anyone who might be watching. In a few minutes, Dad's going to make a toast. I need one of you to record it, him handing me the glass. Make sure you get everything. The bottle, his hand, my face, the whole exchange. Mia's brows drew together. Why? I swallowed hard. Because I think he's trying to hurt me. I'll explain later. Please just trust me. She didn't hesitate this time. I've got it. As I turned back toward the center of the room, I could feel eyes on me. My mother had shifted positions, placing herself between me and the main exit, her smile polished, but her gaze sharp. My father was near the head table checking his watch. The orchestra softened their playing, and the MC announced that the family would soon lead a toast to the graduate. My stomach twisted. It was in moments like these that the Turners truly thrived public displays of unity, luxury, and power. They knew how to craft an image so perfect that no one questioned the shadows behind it. And here's the thing, people want to believe in that image. It makes them feel like success is clean and noble. But in my family, success had always come with a body count, metaphorical or otherwise. I could feel the weight of the glass in my hand. My fingers itched to just set it down and walk away, but that would only tip them off. I needed them to believe I was still playing my part. Rachel. My father's voice boomed across the room, drawing attention from every corner. He motioned me over with that perfect politician's smile he'd practiced for decades. As I approached, the waitstaff moved like a choreographed dance, passing out flutes of champagne to the guests. Only the family table had the bottle with the distinctive black and gold label. He held my gaze as he poured from it, the golden liquid catching the light like honey. Then he reached for my glass. His large hand wrapped around the stem, and for a brief moment, I saw the faint, undissolved cloud swirling at the bottom. To my daughter, he said, raising his own glass for the room to hear. May she find success, fulfillment, and honor in carrying forward the Turner legacy. The words sounded warm to everyone else. To me, they dripped with threat. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause and say this. If you're still watching, drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. I want to know how far this story is reaching, because what I'm about to share could happen in any powerful family in any city. And the more people know, the harder it is for people like my parents to hide. I forced a smile, clinked my glass against his, and tilted it toward my lips without drinking. Around us, the crowd took polite sips, applauding. Cameras flashed. My father's smile deepened like he'd already won. But I knew better. This was just the opening move. And I was already planning my counter-move, one that would not only protect me, but finally pull the mask off the Turner family in front of an audience they could never silence. The toast ended, and the party chatter swelled again. My father leaned in slightly close enough that only I could hear. "Don't disappoint us tonight, Rachel." I met his eyes and let my smile sharpen just enough. Oh, I won't. Inside, the clock had already started ticking, and I wasn't going to waste a single second. From the outside looking in, the Turner family could have been the subject of a glossy magazine spread. Our estate in Napa Valley sprawled across manicured acres, complete with a vineyard, a private tennis court, and a guest house bigger than most people's homes. My father, Charles Turner, had built Turner Biotech into a pharmaceutical powerhouse. My mother, Evelyn, came from Old West Coast money and wielded her social influence like a weapon. They attended galas donated to hospitals and had their names engraved on library wings. Inside those walls, though, the air was cold not because of temperature, but because love was conditional. I grew up watching my older brother Adam collect praise like trophies. He was captain of the rowing team valedictorian, and later an Ivy League MBA who slid effortlessly into the family business. When Adam entered a room, my parents' faces lit up. They never missed his big games or his award ceremonies. His framed accolades lined the study walls. My accomplishments, on the other hand, were met with polite nods or backhanded compliments. When I graduated top of my high school class, my father's only comment was, "That's expected from a Turner." When I won a national science competition, my mother remarked that I should have fixed my hair before going on stage. It wasn't that I underperformed, I thrived academically and creatively. I just didn't fit the mold they had crafted for me. The Turners had a roadmap for their children degrees in pharmaceutical sciences, then a lifetime of loyalty to the company. Adam was the prototype. I was the glitch in the system. From the time I was 15, I knew I wanted to pursue environmental science, specifically the effects of pharmaceutical waste on ecosystems. It was personal growing up around Turner Biotech. I'd heard whispers about the byproducts no one wanted to talk about. When I brought it up at dinner one night, my father dismissed it as eco-drama nonsense. My mother sighed and changed the subject to Adam's next rowing meet. That disconnect only deepened when I was accepted into a master's program in environmental chemistry in San Francisco. It wasn't Turner approved, but it was my dream. I thought maybe they'd support it as long as I stayed connected to science. I was wrong. The day I told them, my father's jaw tightened. "You're throwing away the opportunities we've given you," he said. "You think the world cares about fish and runoff? You're naive." I replied quietly, "Maybe. But at least I'll be doing something that matters to me." They didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. When the silence broke, it came with conditions they would pay my tuition, but I had to complete summer internships at Turner Biotech and take a minor in biochemistry. It was their way of keeping a leash on me. Looking back now, standing there in that banquet hall with a poisoned glass in my hand, I could see how those years had been a slow burn toward this moment. Every ignored achievement, every controlling condition, every time they reminded me I was lucky to be a Turner, it all added up. And I'll tell you something that's hard to admit, part of me still wanted their approval. Even as an adult, part of me still looked for some flicker of pride in their eyes. But pride, I'd learned, only came when you mirrored their image back to them. I watched my mother glide through the crowd that night, shaking hands, laughing softly, her pearls catching the light. To the guests, she was elegance incarnate. To me, she was the person who had once said, "Rachel, you make everything harder than it needs to be." Adam was across the room laughing with a state senator. When his eyes met mine, he offered a brief nod, neither warm nor cold. I wondered, did he know? Was he part of this? Or was he just another pawn in the Turner family game? You might think I'm painting them too harshly, that I'm biased in my hurt. But here's the truth. In families like mine, image is oxygen. Without it, they can't breathe. And anyone who threatens that image, even their own child, becomes expendable. So, as the champagne bubbles swirled in my glass, I remembered every time I'd been told to think of the family, every subtle reminder that my value was tied to my compliance. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just an inconvenience to them anymore. I was a threat. And threats in the Turner playbook were eliminated. That realization didn't terrify me as much as you might think. It focused me, because I wasn't 15 anymore. I wasn't the girl trying to win their approval. I was a woman who had something they couldn't control, my own future, and I wasn't about to let them steal it from me. What I didn't know yet was that the next piece of the puzzle, the one that would explain exactly why tonight had been chosen for the attack, was about to fall into place. The next clue came to me in the most unexpected way, through a slip of the tongue. It happened 2 months before this banquet, back when my relationship with my parents had sunk into what I thought was a cold but manageable stalemate. I had been invited somewhat grudgingly to a family business strategy session. These meetings were usually about Adam's projects at Turner Biotech, and my presence was purely ceremonial, more about optics than contribution. That day, I sat at the end of the long mahogany table in my father's private office, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of coffee while Adam discussed a new product launch. My mother was scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to offer some polished comment about brand integrity. Then their corporate attorney, Robert Lang, joined the meeting. He carried a thick folder which he placed near my father before glancing at me with mild surprise. "Oh," he said. "So, Rachel, congratulations on almost completing your degree. I suppose you'll be ready to access the trust soon." The room froze. I blinked. "Excuse me." Robert looked from my father to my mother, realizing too late that he had stepped into dangerous territory. "I just assumed the Lillian Turner Trust, your grandmother's estate. Well, it becomes fully accessible upon graduation, correct?" My father's jaw tightened so sharply it was like watching a trap spring shut. "Robert," he said in a low voice, "we'll discuss that later." The conversation moved on, but the air in the room had changed. My mother's face had gone pale under her perfect makeup, and Adam looked down at his notes, avoiding my gaze. After the meeting, I cornered Robert in the hallway. "What's this about a trust?" He hesitated. "I can't disclose details without your parents' consent." I leaned closer. "You already did." That night, I dug through every scrap of legal paperwork my grandmother had left me when she passed during my freshman year. There it was, buried under years of neglect, a trust fund set up solely in my name, locked with conditions. Either I graduated with a master's degree or I turned 30, whichever came first. My grandmother's signature was there, and the trustees were independent, not Turner appointed. The number at the bottom made my breath catch. $10 million. Not just money, freedom. My grandmother had been the only one in the family who encouraged my curiosity about the environment. who sent me articles about pharmaceutical waste research, who told me stories about scientists who refused to be bought. I remembered her leaning close when I was 16, whispering, "One day you'll need to stand apart from them. This will help you." It all made sense now. The trust wasn't just a gift, it was an escape plan, and my parents had just realized the clock was about to run out. After that meeting, my father's behavior shifted subtly. The barrage of calls pressuring me to interview at Turner Biotech stopped. My mother began asking oddly specific questions about my graduation date, whether I'd be bringing anyone special to the banquet, and what my summer plans were. It was all coated in sugar, but there was steel beneath it. I told Mia about the trust a week later over coffee. "It's like they're waiting," I said. Waiting for what she asked. That's what I can't figure out, but whatever it is, they're planning something. Now, standing in the banquet hall with that champagne glass in my hand, I knew exactly what. The trust stipulated one other condition I hadn't thought about until now. If I died before receiving it, the entire amount would revert to my parents as next of kin. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was math, cold, merciless math. This was why tonight mattered. This was why the smiles were just a little too wide, the compliments a little too rehearsed. They weren't just celebrating my achievement, they were staging the perfect alibi. I scanned the room again. My father was in deep conversation with a state health commissioner. My mother was laughing with a tech philanthropist, her pearls glowing under the chandelier. Adam stood near the dessert table, scrolling through his phone. If I wanted to get out of this alive and make sure they could never try again, I needed more than survival. I needed proof. Ironclad, undeniable proof that would hold up in a courtroom. And that meant I had to let the game play out just far enough to catch them in it. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had my resolve. The hum of conversation in the banquet hall seemed to grow louder, as if the air itself was trying to muffle what I'd just pieced together. My parents weren't just manipulative, they were strategic predators. And tonight, I was their prey. I shifted my focus to logistics. If I simply refused the champagne, or slipped away, they would try again another day. But if I wanted them exposed, I had to let this run close enough to the edge for the evidence to be indisputable. That meant staying calm, acting natural, and making sure my allies knew exactly what to do when the moment came. I spotted Mia again this time, talking with Jordan near the dessert table. I approached casually, balancing the flute in my hand like it was nothing more than a party prop. Mia's eyes darted to the glass immediately. "You still have that," she murmured. "Yes," I said quietly, "and I'm going to need you both ready." Jordan frowned. "Rachel, are you sure you don't want to just get rid of it?" I gave the smallest shake of my head. "If I do, we lose the only shot at proving what they're doing. This has to be caught in the act." Then I leaned in, keeping my voice just above a whisper. "When the toast happens, I want both of you filming 2 angles. And Mia, make sure you get Dad's hand off to me." Jordan, focus on my face and the glass. The goal is to have him on camera, clearly identifying my drink. Mia nodded, her jaw tightening. Jordan exhaled slowly, the weight of what I'd asked sinking in. I hesitated, then added something that had been nagging at me. "And I need your honest opinion. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you go through with it knowing the risk?" Jordan looked me dead in the eye. "If it's the only way to stop them, yes. But you have to be smart. This is chess, not checkers." That made me smile despite everything. Exactly. We broke apart as a group of guests approached, and I made my way toward the balcony doors for some air. Outside, the night was cool and still. The city lights glittered beyond the railing, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to just breathe. But even here I could feel the invisible threads of the evening tightening around me. Inside, the waitstaff was beginning to circulate again, trays of champagne ready. My father was working the room like a seasoned politician, pausing to shake hands, clapping old friends on the back. My mother floated nearby, her gaze occasionally flicking toward me, as if to ensure I hadn't wandered too far. I've learned something in moments like this. When you know someone's trying to destroy you, the worst thing you can do is look cornered. Predators smell fear. If you keep moving, smiling, acting as if nothing is wrong, it forces them to wonder how much you know. It puts them off balance. I stepped back inside, rejoining the current of guests. A photographer caught me in a candid shot, and I managed a natural laugh. It felt strange, almost surreal, to play my part so convincingly when I could feel danger pressing in from all sides. Mia drifted past me, subtly brushing her hand against mine, a prearranged signal that she and Jordan were in position. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes to the toast, 10 minutes to the moment where I would either secure the proof I needed or watch my parents slip away with no one the wiser. Before I move to rejoin the main floor, I'll say this to you: if you were standing in my shoes right now with every instinct telling you to run, but your mind screaming for justice, what would you do? I want you to think about that and tell me in the comments, because the answer says a lot about who we become when everything's on the line. The truth, I didn't know if my plan would work, but I knew I'd rather face the danger head-on than live another day wondering if they'd try again. And so, with my pulse steady and my mind clear, I stepped forward into the game they thought they were controlling. The clock was still ticking, and I was ready to make my move. The servers began to weave through the crowd again, silver trays balanced perfectly in their hands. From where I stood, I could see my father directing one of them toward the head table, his expression calm and controlled, an actor moments before stepping on stage. My mother adjusted the clasp on her pearl necklace, scanning the room with that faint smile that hid more than it revealed. I wasn't just watching them. I was memorizing every movement, every detail. The way my father's hand lingered over a particular bottle of champagne. The way my mother leaned in to whisper something that made him smirk like they were sharing an inside joke. Mia had positioned herself by the band phone in hand, but angled discreetly toward the head table. Jordan stood near the bar, pretending to examine the wine selection, while keeping me and my father in his peripheral vision. The orchestra shifted to a softer piece. A cue I'd learned from countless family events meant the formalities were about to begin. My father stepped to the center glass in hand, tapping it lightly with a silver knife. The crystalline ring silenced the room. Friends, family, honored guests, he began, voice rich with pride. Tonight we celebrate not just an academic achievement, but the continuation of a legacy. I felt the words land like carefully aimed darts. Legacy. Continuation. His subtext was clear. My future in his mind belonged to the Turner name, to Turner Biotech, to him. As he spoke, my gaze fell on the special tray being carried toward us. 6 flutes for the family. The champagne's hue looked identical in each glass, but I knew mine had been prepared differently. When the tray reached him, he lifted one glass without hesitation and extended it toward me. To my daughter Rachel. May she honor the family as she carves her path. There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Mia's phone was steady. Jordan had shifted slightly, catching my father's handoff in perfect view. I accepted the glass, meeting my father's eyes with a smile that didn't touch mine. And then, just before raising it, I tilted my head slightly toward the guests in the front row. Before we toast, I said lightly, I want to thank everyone here for supporting me, even when my choices weren't the easiest to understand. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. My mother's smile stiffened. My father's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. That was my cue to lay the groundwork for what came next. You know, I added, it's funny. People always ask me how I stayed so determined in such a competitive family. The answer's simple. I learned to listen to my instincts. I let that hang for a beat. Not long enough for anyone to suspect the real meaning, but enough for my parents to hear the warning under the words. Then I took the smallest possible sip, just enough to make it look convincing, letting the liquid barely touch my lips before lowering the glass again. I could feel my father watching me, weighing whether I'd taken the bait. Here's where I'm going to pause for you listening right now. What would your instincts tell you in this moment? Would you drain the glass, call them out in front of everyone, or play the long game? Drop your thoughts below, because I think this is the kind of choice that defines who we are under pressure. Around us, the guests echoed the toast and drank. My mother's knuckles whitened around her glass. My father's smile was carved from stone. The room shifted back into the easy murmur of conversation, but the undercurrent between us was electric, crackling with the knowledge that only we 3 understood what was at stake. I slipped into the crowd again, careful to keep the poisoned glass in my right hand. I wasn't ready to make my move yet, but the stage was set. The footage was captured, the players were in place, and the next act was about to begin. What my parents didn't know was that they'd just given me exactly what I needed to turn their own game against them. I slipped away from the main hall, the noise of clinking glasses and polite chatter fading behind me. The hallway outside the banquet room was quieter, dimmer, like the intermission between acts in a play. I could hear my own breathing, now steady, but quick, my pulse drumming in my ears. The poisoned champagne glass was still in my hand, its golden contents catching the low light like something innocent or lethal. Mia was waiting by the service door, her phone tucked inside her clutch. She looked at me like she already knew the answer. You got it, she whispered. I held up the glass, front row seats to their downfall. Jordan appeared from the opposite corridor carrying a small, innocuous-looking case. Inside was the portable testing kit he'd borrowed from his lab. The plan was simple: confirm what we already suspected, keep the glass as evidence, and then let my parents play themselves into a corner. I set the glass down on a side table as Jordan worked quickly, his movements efficient but tense. The strip darkened almost instantly, turning a deep crimson that confirmed everything. "This isn't just bad," he said quietly. "This is enough to cause respiratory failure in minutes." A cold wave ran through me, but not fear resolve. "Then we make sure they drink it themselves." The idea had been forming in my head ever since I overheard their plan in the study weeks ago. My parents prided themselves on control. They would never suspect a reversal if it was done with precision and timing. And tonight, timing was everything. We moved back toward the banquet hall just as the second course was being cleared. The servers were weaving in and out with fresh drinks. I caught the eye of one I recognized, Daniel, who'd worked for our family for years, but had no love for my parents. I stepped into his path. "Can you help me with something discreet?" I asked under my breath. His eyes flicked to the glass in my hand, then back to my face. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Bring this to my father. Tell him the caterer prepared a special reserve for him to toast with the board members." Daniel's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Consider it done." I returned to my seat, every step calculated to appear casual. Across the table, my father was mid-conversation with one of his business partners, his hand resting lightly on the stem of his current glass. Then Daniel arrived, presenting the special reserve with a flourish. "From the chef, sir," he said. "A vintage chosen just for you." My father took it without hesitation, lifting it slightly toward the other men at the table. Well, it would be rude to refuse. I watched him bring it to his lips, and for the first time all evening I allowed myself a slow breath. He took a generous sip, oblivious. The poison was in him now, but I didn't need or want him to collapse in the middle of the party. Not yet. I needed the chain of events to unfold in a way that exposed them completely. Mia's phone was angled perfectly from across the room. Jordan lingered near the doors, keeping an eye on both exits. The pieces were falling into place, but we weren't at checkmate yet. Here's where I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Sometimes revenge isn't about the immediate blow. It's about the slow tightening of a trap until the other person realizes far too late that escape is impossible. As the evening wore on, my father's confident posture began to stiffen. His hand trembled slightly when he reached for his fork. My mother's eyes darted to him, more often, her own unease growing. I kept my expression neutral, even warm, as if nothing in the world was amiss. By the time dessert was served, the poison would be doing its work. Not enough to kill outright, not yet, but enough to weaken, enough to unsettle. Enough for me to set the stage for the twist that would drop the entire room into chaos. And that twist was coming sooner than they thought. The air in the banquet hall had shifted. It wasn't just me who felt it. There was a subtle tension humming beneath the polite laughter, the quiet clink of silverware on china. My father's complexion had taken on a faint pallor, his confident grin replaced with something tighter strained. My mother's hand rested on his arm, now fingers tapping ever so slightly, betraying her nerves. But the real magic of a well-laid plan is that no one else sees the strings being pulled. They just think they're watching a performance until the curtain drops. I rose from my seat with the excuse of freshening up and slipped toward the far end of the hall where the dessert table was being set up. It was draped in white linen, lined with crystal flutes for the champagne toast. That toast, my father's traditional end-of-evening flourish, was the moment everything would pivot. Mia was already there, her expression calm, but her eyes alive with anticipation. In her hand she held an identical flute to the one I'd given Daniel earlier, except this one. This one was clean, untouched, harmless. "You sure you want to do the switch?" she asked softly. "Absolutely," I replied. "This isn't just about payback, it's about control. If I give him the antidote, he'll think he escaped fate on his own. It'll make him reckless." Mia's lips curved in a slow smile, and reckless men always reveal their weakest points. As the waitstaff began to pour champagne for the toast, I subtly positioned myself behind the lead server. When the poisoned his flute was placed on the tray, I casually brushed past, accidentally knocking it into my hand. In one smooth motion, I swapped it for the clean glass Mia held. The poisoned one slipped into the folds of my clutch like a secret too dark to let go. By the time the server reached my father, he was none the wiser. He raised the glass high, his voice carrying across the room, to family, to loyalty, and to a future built on trust. I almost laughed at the irony. Everyone drank glasses, clinked, cameras flashed. My father, now sipping harmless champagne, seemed to steady a little enough to believe the worst had passed. That was the point. I wanted him confident again. Confident enough to expose himself when I laid the final trap. Jordan caught my gaze from across the room, giving a subtle nod. He knew exactly what came next. Mia, too, understood her cue. She slid her phone from her bag and began streaming live to a private group, a select mix of journalists, board members, and a few enemies my parents didn't know they had. The camera stayed trained on the head table, capturing every word, every flicker of expression. Here's the thing about people who build their lives on lies. I thought my fingers tightening around the poisoned glass hidden in my clutch. They can't help but add one more layer to the lie, even when they're already crumbling. Halfway through the toast, a board member, Mr. Lang, asked my father about a recent deal that had been making quiet waves in the financial sector. My father, perhaps still buoyed by the illusion that his night was back under control, launched into an unguarded explanation. And there it was, the slip, the admission, the kind of statement that could destroy not just his reputation, but his empire if heard by the right ears. Mia's camera caught it all. I leaned back in my chair, letting the satisfaction wash over me. He'd just written his own ending, and I hadn't even had to force the pen into his hand. The poisoned glass in my clutch felt heavier now, almost humming with possibility. It wasn't just evidence anymore, it was insurance. A reminder that I still held the power to finish what I'd started whenever I chose. By the end of the toast, the hall was buzzing with polite applause. But I could see the subtle shift in certain faces, the board members who suddenly looked thoughtful, the journalists who excused themselves to take a call. The game was tilting, and for the first time in my life, I was the one leaning on the winning side of the board. Still, this was only the prelude. The real downfall was yet to come. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a fall, it would be a collapse so complete that no one would dare try to rebuild the ruins. You know that split second when you feel the air change, when you just know something's about to happen, but you can't quite name it yet. That's exactly where I wanted everyone in that room to be. The applause from my father's toast hadn't even faded when I noticed the first ripple, Mr. Lang leaning toward his wife, murmuring something sharp. Two journalists slipping out into the hallway with their phones already at their ears. And Jordan giving me a look that wasn't relief, it was warning. That's when I realized the trap I'd set for my father might have just flushed out something bigger, something I hadn't accounted for. My father was still riding his post-toast high, laughing with a few board members oblivious to the shift. That was fine, I wanted him oblivious. But the tightening in my chest told me this game had just gained another player, one I hadn't invited. From my seat, I caught a glimpse of a man standing near the entrance, tall, square shoulders, wearing a charcoal suit that somehow seemed too plain for this kind of event. He wasn't mingling, wasn't holding a drink, wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on me. Mia followed my gaze, and I could see the flicker of recognition in her face. "That's not one of ours," she muttered under her breath. "Do you know him?" I asked, keeping my lips barely moving. She shook her head slowly. "But he knows you." A cold rush slid down my spine. This wasn't paranoia. Paranoia whispers in the dark. This felt like a spotlight. I decided not to give him the satisfaction of catching me staring. Instead, I rose from my seat, smiling politely at the guests as if I were making another round of greetings. In reality, I was circling toward the far corridor, one that led to the service exit. Mia slipped out the opposite way, her phone still live streaming, but now angled toward the mysterious man. Halfway down the corridor, I heard the sound of polished shoes on marble. Steady, unhurried, like whoever it was didn't mind me knowing I was being followed. I stopped. So I said without turning around, "You going to keep shadowing me, or are you going to introduce yourself?" There was a pause, then a deep voice replied, "I'm here to make sure you don't do something you can't take back." I turned then slowly, and met eyes the color of steel. "I don't recall asking for a babysitter." "You didn't," he said simply. "But if you think tonight's little stunt was just about your father, you're already in over your head." My pulse quickened, but my face stayed calm. "And you know this how?" "Let's just say he took a step closer. There's more than one person in that room who wants to see him fall. And not all of them care whether you go down with him." That was when it hit me, whatever game I thought I was playing, the board was bigger than I'd imagined. I tilted my head, letting a small smile tug at my lips. "Then I guess you'll have to stick around and see how I survive it." For the first time, he almost smiled, or how you don't. Before I could ask more, the sound of glasses shattering echoed from the banquet hall, followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. He stepped back, motioning toward the door. Looks like your show just got a new act. Might want to get back before you lose control of the narrative. I slipped past him, my mind racing. If this was an open field now, I'd need to move faster, strike harder, and make sure that when the dust settled, it was my voice telling the story. And speaking of stories, if you've stayed with me this far, you know things are just starting to get interesting. This is the kind of moment where you lean in because the next move could change everything. So stay right here because what happens next, you won't see coming. As I stepped back into the banquet hall, all eyes were on the head table except mine. Mine were on the poisoned glass in my clutch, and the steel-eyed stranger now blending into the crowd. 2 weapons, 2 threats, and I had to decide which one to use first. The room was no longer a banquet. It was a stage about to collapse under its own weight. Crystal glasses lay shattered on the polished floor, red wine bleeding into the white linen like an open wound. Guests murmured in small, anxious clusters, their eyes darting toward the head table, where my father sat stiff and pale, his hand clutching the edge of the tablecloth. Jordan was at his side, pretending to be concerned, but I could see at the tightness in his jaw, the barely hidden satisfaction. Someone else had made a move, and I hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. I slid into the crowd, my pulse quickening. This was the danger zone, the moment when anyone could seize control of the narrative if I didn't act fast. The steel-eyed stranger from before was gone, but his words echoed in my head. More than one person wants to see him fall. From the corner of my eye, I caught Mia, her phone camera angled discreetly toward the table. She mouthed 2 words, "Don't speak." I understood why. In chaos, the first person to speak often paints themselves into a corner. Better to wait, watch, let the cracks widen on their own. Then it happened. A waiter, shaking pale, approached my father with a folded note. He glanced at it, and his face drained of what little color remained. I couldn't read it from here, but whatever it said, it landed like a grenade. He crumpled the paper in his fist, but not before Jordan leaned over to read it as well. Jordan's lips curved into the kind of smile you never want to see in a room full of witnesses. I moved closer, angling myself so I could catch snippets of the conversation without looking obvious. "You think this is about a bad quarter," Jordan murmured. "This is about survival, and you've just lost the vote." My father's voice low and strained. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I already have." The tension in my father's shoulders told me everything. Jordan had just taken his crown, and the coup wasn't private. It was unfolding in real time in front of people who would repeat every detail before dessert was served. I stepped back, my mind racing. This wasn't my moment to strike, it was my moment to make them think I had. If the whispers tied this night's downfall to me, every shadowy player would come sniffing for an alliance. That was my leverage. I leaned toward Mia as I passed. Make sure they see me leave, not sneak leave. She didn't question it. Within moments, her live stream caught me walking confidently toward the exit. No rush in my steps, no shame in my posture. Let them think I was satisfied. Let them wonder why. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, but the tension didn't loosen. The steel-eyed stranger was leaning against a black sedan, as if he'd known I'd come out here. "Your father's not the only one bleeding tonight," he said. I crossed my arms. "You going to tell me who else is playing, or do I have to guess?" "You'll figure it out," he said, pushing off the car. "But you're in a dangerous position. Half the room thinks you're the architect. The other half thinks you're the next target. Either way, you're a headline waiting to happen." Then maybe I said, stepping closer, "It's time I start writing the headline myself." His eyes studied me for a long moment before he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Careful. Headlines have a way of becoming epitaphs." He got into the sedan and drove off, leaving me with the echo of his warning. Back inside, the music had stopped completely. I caught sight of my father standing now, trying to rally the room with some half-hearted speech about unity and resilience, but the power in his voice was gone. The board members weren't nodding anymore. They were staring at their phones, probably reading the same leak that had just destroyed him. This was the point of no return. I could walk away, let the wolves finish him and save myself, or I could step into the spotlight and control the chaos. I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes on me as I approached the table. If you're still watching this unfold, I'd say softly to the audience in my mind, remember, sometimes the most dangerous move you can make is not attacking, but making everyone think you already have. And as I placed my hand on the back of my father's chair, every conversation in the room stopped. They were ready for the next act, and so was I. The air in that banquet hall felt heavier than smoke, thick, choking, and alive with the scent of power-shifting hands. My father's chair was still warm under my palm, but his grip on the evening had already gone cold. All around us, the board members kept their eyes on me, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. They didn't know if I was the executioner or the heir. "Sit," my father said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. But it wasn't an order, it was a plea. And that alone told me how far he'd fallen in the last 10 minutes. I didn't sit. Instead, I circled to the opposite side of the table where Jordan had claimed the prime spot near the wine. His hand rested on the back of a chair, his watch catching the light like a signal flare. I leaned forward just enough to enter his space. "Congratulations," I murmured. "Must feel good to win when the other player doesn't know the rules." His smile was sharp. "Don't pretend you weren't playing. Everyone here saw you walk out like you'd already cashed the check." Perfect. The narrative was spreading exactly as I wanted. I straightened up and addressed the room without raising my voice. "It's funny," I began, "how quickly people jump to conclusions when they smell blood. But if you're so sure I've pulled the strings tonight, maybe you should be asking yourself who benefits from letting you think that." There was a flicker, small but visible, in the faces of 3 board members at the far end. They didn't know if they'd been complicit or duped, and that uncertainty was exactly the wedge I needed. Jordan leaned back, feigning amusement. "Careful," he said. "You sound like you're challenging me." "I'm not challenging you, Jordan," I said, stepping closer. "I'm telling you, if you've built your little coup on lies about me, you'd better hope those lies are airtight. Because if they're not, I'll make sure the truth cuts deeper than anything you've done tonight." Gasps rippled through the table. Somewhere behind me, Mia's phone was still streaming the quiet hum of live commentary, keeping the tension alive like a slow drumbeat. That was when the steel-eyed stranger reappeared, not inside, but visible through the glass doors at the far end of the hall. He didn't move, didn't signal, but the fact that he was there at all told me the night wasn't done turning. I let my eyes linger on him just long enough for others to notice. Then I looked back at the board. "We've all seen enough shows to know the first act ends with a twist," I said. "And trust me, you're not going to want to miss this one." It wasn't an idle comment. It was an open loop, the kind you plant not just in the minds of the people in front of you, but in the minds of anyone watching from home. The best part: they'd fill the silence with their own theories, and every theory would keep my name in their mouths. Jordan tried to cut the tension with a laugh. "You're bluffing." I smiled, not because he was wrong, but because he was so certain he was right. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I've just learned that the only thing more dangerous than a truth untold is one that's told too soon." Before he could answer, a phone buzzed loudly on the table. One of the senior board members glanced at the screen and went pale. Without a word, she stood and left the room. 2 others followed. It was a chain reaction I hadn't started, but I could certainly finish. The power had shifted again, and this time it wasn't settling neatly in anyone's hands. I turned to leave, but paused long enough to let my gaze sweep the room. "If you want to know the rest," I said lightly, "you'll have to be patient." And as I walked away, I could feel it, their curiosity turning into desperation. Exactly where I wanted them. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, like the world's holding its breath. My phone was already vibrating against the nightstand, notifications stacked like falling dominoes, news alerts, missed calls, and a dozen messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't need to open them to know the truth. Last night's performance had spilled beyond the banquet hall. It was everywhere now. But one message stood out. It was from an unlisted number, and it was just a single sentence. "They're rewriting the story. Meet me at the pier in 1 hour." I didn't hesitate. I dressed in the kind of casual that makes you blend in, but still lets you move fast, dark jeans jacket, no heels. Outside, the air had that salty tang from the bay, the kind that carried voices farther than you wanted them to go. The pier was mostly empty, save for one lone figure leaning against a railing. I knew her before I saw her face, Mia. She'd been quiet since the stream ended last night, too quiet. "You're trending," she said without looking at me. "But not for the reasons you want." My chest tightened. "What are they saying?" "That you walked out because you were afraid. That you've been covering for your father for years, and last night you decided to save yourself." She pulled out her phone and pressed play on a clip. There was Jordan's voice, smooth and measured, telling a group of reporters how he'd tried to protect the family, but couldn't stop me from making a spectacle. It was a clean move, poisoning the well before I could even pour my own water. Do you believe it? I asked. Mia shook her head. Doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what they believe. She was right. Perception was the currency now, and Jordan was spending it faster than I could earn it back. But perception has a flaw, it shifts under pressure. There's something you're not telling me, I said. Mia hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. This was sent to me last night. No name, no note. Just watch it. We ducked into a nearby coffee shop, claiming a back table under the hum of weak fluorescent lights. I plugged the drive into my laptop, and the video that popped up wasn't grainy or secret, it was crystal clear. It showed Jordan in a private meeting leaning across a table to shake hands with one of my father's oldest rivals. The audio was perfect. Jordan, by the time she realizes she's the villain in this story, will have everything. The timestamp was from a week ago. I leaned back, the implications settling over me like a weighted blanket. This wasn't just about taking me down. This was about dismantling my father's legacy piece by piece, using me as the wrecking ball. Mia's eyes searched mine. If you drop this, it'll burn him to the ground, but it'll burn you too. I stared at the paused frame of Jordan's smug face. Sometimes you have to set a fire to see who runs toward it and who runs away. But I didn't hit play again. Not yet. Timing was everything, and if I'd learned anything from last night, it was that the right truth at the wrong time is just another lie. As we left the coffee shop, I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. The bay breeze had picked up, carrying the sound of gulls and distant ship horns. Somewhere out there, Jordan was confident he'd gotten ahead of me. Good, let him think that. Because the game wasn't over, it was about to change boards entirely. And in this version, I wasn't just playing to win. I was playing to erase his name from the table forever. That evening, the city felt different, like it was watching me. Every flicker of a streetlight, every shadow cast by passing cars, felt like a reminder that the narrative was no longer mine to control. I knew I couldn't move recklessly. Jordan's camp was already painting me as impulsive, emotional, unstable. If I charged in swinging with that flash drive too soon, I'd only confirm their script. So I decided to play his game, but better. I called an old friend, Sam Carter, a journalist whose work had buried more than one political career. Sam answered on the second ring, his voice equal parts curiosity and suspicion. You don't call me unless you're standing at the edge of a cliff. I'm not at the edge, I told him. I'm the one holding the dynamite. That got his attention. Within an hour, we were meeting in the quiet back booth of a diner that smelled like coffee and fried onions. I slid the flash drive across the table. He didn't touch it. What's the catch? No catch. But it doesn't drop until I tell you. And when it does, I want every angle, every connection. I want the story so airtight that when it lands, there's no room for spin. Sam gave a slow nod. So you're not just going after him, you're going after the machine. Exactly. We talked logistics, timelines, corroborating witnesses, the layers of proof we'd need. But in the middle of that conversation, something clicked in my mind. I realized Jordan's biggest weapon wasn't the media smear or the private deals. It was the fact that he believed I wouldn't cross certain lines. He thought I'd cling to reputation, to appearances, to the idea of playing fair. He was wrong. When I left the diner, I walked straight into the bite of the night air, feeling the city's hum under my feet. I didn't go home. Instead, I headed to the place where this all began, the old marina, where my father used to take me on Sunday mornings. Back then, I thought the sea was just water and wind. Now I knew it was a teacher. Tide shift, storms pass, but the horizon always waits. Standing at the edge of the pier, I rehearsed what I would do next. Not just the public takedown, but the private one, the move that would pull Jordan out of his safe little fortress. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time the message was just 2 words he knows. No name, no number. But I didn't need one. Jordan wasn't stupid. If he suspected I had something, he'd accelerate his timeline, which meant I had to accelerate mine. I made a decision right there under the halo of a single flickering pier light. I wouldn't wait for the perfect moment. I'd make the moment perfect. The next morning, Sam would get the go-ahead. The footage would be cued, the story locked, the angles cross-checked. But before it went public, I'd meet Jordan face to face. I wanted him to see it in my eyes, that I wasn't just surviving this, I was ending it. I slipped the flash drive into the inner pocket of my jacket and turned toward the city skyline. This wasn't the climax yet. This was the deep breath before the plunge, the final tightening of the rope before it snaps. And somewhere inside me I could feel the balance shifting. Jordan had been the hunter for too long. It was time for him to realize the roles had reversed. The elevator ride up to Jordan's penthouse felt like being pulled into the eye of a storm. The mirrored walls reflected my face back at me, a face I barely recognized. This wasn't the same person who had been blindsided months ago. This was someone forged in fire. When the door slid open, his assistant tried to block me. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked her in the eye and said, "He'll want to see me. Trust me." A pause, a flicker of uncertainty, and then she stepped aside. Jordan was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The city sprawled out behind him like his personal empire. He didn't turn when I entered. "I hear you've been busy," he said, his tone like someone talking to a child who'd drawn on the walls. I closed the distance between us, each step deliberate. Busy isn't the word I'd use. Focused, maybe. Intentional. Finally he turned, and for the first time I saw a shadow of unease in his eyes. He was expecting fear, maybe anger, but I gave him something worse, calm. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and set it on the table between us. His gaze darted to it, then back to me. "You think you can scare me with whatever's on that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the bar, poured myself a drink, and let the silence grow heavy between us. "I don't need to scare you, Jordan. I just need to let the truth breathe. And trust me, it's suffocating in here." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You release that you burn bridges you can't rebuild. You torch your own reputation along with mine. That's the difference between us," I said, meeting his gaze head on. "You think reputation is everything. I know it's just the mask people wear until the truth rips it off." I could see him recalculating, trying to find an angle. That's when I decided to twist the knife. I've already lined up 3 witnesses, bank records, the footage, and a journalist who doesn't scare easily. When this drops, it won't just be about you. It'll be about the whole rotten machine you built. His jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough that it felt like a private confession. "By this time tomorrow, your name will be a cautionary tale. Not because I hate you, Jordan, but because I won't let you own my story anymore." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "You've changed." "I've remembered who I am," I said simply. I left the flash drive where it sat, turned toward the elevator, and didn't look back. Every step away from him felt like reclaiming oxygen I didn't know I'd lost. By the time I reached the street, Sam had already texted everything set. Say the word. I looked up at the sky clouds, heavy, the air electric. The city was holding its breath, and so was I. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about closure, about burning the last bridge, so there'd be no temptation to cross back. I typed one word in reply now. Somewhere in that towering glass building, Jordan was realizing that the empire he'd built was about to crumble from the inside. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. Tomorrow the whole world would see, and he'd know exactly who lit the match. The next morning I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating like it was possessed. Notifications, calls, messages flooding in faster than I could swipe. For a second I just sat there staring at the screen, knowing this was the moment everything changed. The headline on the first alert read, "Corporate mogul Jordan Black exposed in shocking evidence leak." Below it, his smug face stared back at me, frozen in a still frame, from one of the very videos I'd handed over. The footage was everywhere: morning news, online blogs, viral Twitter threads. Every major network had picked it up. My inbox was full of reporters wanting an exclusive, friends sending messages of support, and a few anonymous threats from faceless accounts that screamed desperation. But under it all, there was a quiet satisfaction. Not joy, not yet. Just the deep, steady beat of justice finally catching up. By noon, the internet had turned him into a villain of cinematic proportions. Hashtags calling for his arrest were trending. Former employees came forward with their own stories. The shareholders panicked. His company's stock plummeted. The perfect empire he had built so carefully was dissolving in real time, and the world was watching. Sam called me around 2. "It's done," he said, his voice almost reverent. "He's finished." But I didn't feel finished. I stepped outside, letting the cool air wash over me, and walked toward the small coffee shop at the corner. People glanced up from their phones as I passed, some whispering, others giving me knowing nods. My face wasn't on the news, but the story had taken on a life of its own, and somehow they knew. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the street outside bustle with life. It struck me then how much of my own life I had put on hold while trying to fight him. I had let his shadow stretch across my days, dictating where I could breathe. but now that shadow was gone. Jordan, of course, didn't go quietly. By evening, his lawyer had issued a statement claiming the footage was doctored and misinterpreted. But the evidence was too detailed, too airtight. The public had seen the raw truth, and there was no way to put the genie back in the bottle. That night, Sam and I sat in my living room, the TV muted, while a news anchor gestured wildly in the background about the scandal. So he said, breaking the silence, "What now?" I thought about it for a long moment. Now we stop surviving and start living. It wasn't just about punishing him, it was about reclaiming my own agency. About proving that I could stand in the storm, take the hit, and still walk forward. I had fought for my story, and I'd won it back. Before bed, I took out the small notebook I'd kept hidden in my nightstand, the one where I'd written all the things I wanted to do when it was over. It wasn't a bucket list exactly, more like a promise to myself. Learn to surf, take a road trip across the West Coast, go back to school, plant a garden. I turned to the first page and drew a line through the one at the top, "Take my life back." The finality of that stroke was like exhaling after holding my breath for years. And though part of me would always remember the fight, the sleepless nights, the fear, the adrenaline, I knew it would no longer define me. Jordan would fade into a cautionary tale, and I would move forward lighter than I'd ever been. Tomorrow I'd wake up without that weight on my chest. Tomorrow, the first day of my life after the storm, I'd start building something new. But tonight I simply stood by the window looking out at the city lights and let the quiet victory settle into my bones. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't watching them fall, it's walking away free. The following weeks felt like stepping into a new season of my life, one where the air itself seemed lighter. Without the constant hum of fear in the background, I began noticing the smaller things again, the sound of rain tapping against my windows, the way the morning light spilled across my kitchen counter, the comforting smell of fresh coffee. I spent my mornings walking through the neighborhood, no longer checking over my shoulder. Sam often joined me, and sometimes we didn't even talk. We just enjoyed the quiet. It was a kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The garden I'd been meaning to plant finally took root in the small patch of earth behind my building. At first, it was just a few tomato plants and herbs. But as the days passed, I added flowers, bright marigolds, lavender sunflowers that stretched toward the sky. Watching them grow became my own form of therapy, a reminder that life could still be nurtured after seasons of drought. Old friends I'd drifted from reached out and I let them back in. Not all of them, some connections were better left in the past, but the ones who had truly cared stayed. We laughed, more planned weekend trips, and even started a small book club that mostly ended in wine and long conversations. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a notebook adding new pages to my someday list. This time, it wasn't about reclaiming something stolen, it was about building something better. There was a profound freedom in creating without the need to prove anything to anyone. Jordan's name still popped up in the news from time to time, each headline another piece of his downfall. But I didn't read the articles anymore. His story wasn't mine to carry. Life, I realized, isn't just about surviving the storms. It's about planting something beautiful in their wake. And as I watched the last golden light of the day fade into a deep, calm night, I truly knew that I was free.